All right, so today I want to talk about God's plan and man's response, and then we'll compare two creation mythos, and I'll show you exactly why I'm doing that as we get to it. Hopefully it'll make sense then. So here was God's plan. He starts out and creates man and woman, and then man and woman break the covenant. All right? From the moment that that covenant was breached, when they ate from the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, God had a plan to restore this. In fact, the entire Old Testament is just a crescendo of him bringing his son into the world and then dying for us. What I want you to understand, though, about this breach here, this eating of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, is the only way you could properly understand what happened there is if you can think of yourself being married for 15 years and you just found out that your spouse was having an affair the last 5. That's what happened. I mean, this was a very deep covenant. They broke that covenant. You can use adultery as an analogy to understand what was going on. Now, why do I say that? Because if you understand that, then you'll understand the significance of what he did next. Proto-evangelium. Does anybody remember what that means? What does it mean? I know you guys probably had that in Scripture. Proto is what? First gospel, first good news. All right? So the minute that this covenant was breached with God, out of his mouth came, I will put enmity between, speaking to the serpent, I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. You will snap at her ankles and she will crush your head. Okay. Now, what would that interpret for us? That would be as if you're married for 15 years and you find out that your spouse was having an affair for the last 5. And the first words out of your mouth were, I'm going to restore and fix this between us. Would that be your first response? No. That should be then give you the context of how amazing it was what God said. So the entire Old Testament was him preparing the world for not just for his son, but also for the redemption that his son brings. So here we then have the promise of the proto-evangelium. Here is he who will crush the head of the serpent. This, by the way, is the Annunciation. This is when God became man, not Christmas. Christmas is the feast of the nativity of God, of the Lord. That's his birth. This, the Annunciation, is when Mary was found to be with child. This is on March 25th, is when we celebrate this. Does anybody want to guess why we celebrate this March 25th? 9 months before December 25th, his birth, right? So we're coming up on this, all right? Anyway, that's God's plan in a nutshell. I'm just putting it out there so that you get it, okay? There's also a response that we, as a people, have to his plan. And again, if this underwhelms you, like if it doesn't seem like it's very insightful, just keep in mind how, I want to say how drastic of a response it was on God's part, and then what he's asking of us. So, when we say we image God, I want you to know that there's nothing outside of the purview in our lives that God's imaging doesn't include. So we image God in our actions of love, our actions of gift, in our sexuality, and in our friendships, okay? We image God in our actions of love and gift, in our sexuality, and in our friendships. So no, God does not stay out of the bedroom. All right? I saw a sign during one of the recent marches. A woman was carrying, said, "Keep your rosaries away from my ovaries." All right? Okay. The problem with slogans is they're clever and usually have no meaning, right? What does that mean? In other words, stay away from my reproductive rights. So God has nothing to do with the understanding of who you are as a person, your human sexuality, and your reproduction? Are you saying that's out of God's purview? Right? I mean, we have to watch if we don't, not to get caught up in slogans. So, Christ makes it very clear. Whatever you do to the least of my brethren, you do to me. So, if you guys remember this pericope from Matthew, yes. No, just make sure, okay, you have to start, I'm going to tell you what I want from this, all right? What I want you to know from this is that we're called to image him. And whatever you do to somebody else, you better know you're doing it to him. If you are rude and ignorant to me or disrespectful, you're doing that to God. If I am not respectful to you, I'm doing that to God. I mean, we read over these, little phrases and sections in Scripture, and sometimes we don't realize the meaning of them. So when Christ said, in other words, Father, after the person died, he said, when I was hungry, you did not feed me. When I was tired, you did not give me rest. When I was thirsty, you did not give me a drink. When I was in prison, you did not visit me. And the man said, I've never seen you before. God says, yeah, but every time you did it, or didn't do it to the least of my brethren, you didn't do it to me. Then the next guy comes up and he says, when I was tired, you did give me rest. When I was hungry, you fed me. When I was thirsty, you gave me drink. When I was in prison, you visited me. Now enter into the home of my Father. And the man says, I've never seen you before. And he said, no, every time you did it to the least of my brethren, you did it to me. All right? So we have to watch what our relationship is with each other. There's nothing outside of that, right? I'm trying to set the stage for you to understand that when we study morality, there's nothing that it doesn't touch. Morality cannot stay out of the bedroom. So that phrase that I said earlier, even though it sounds clever, right? It's punny. Keep your rosaries away from my ovaries. Has no understanding of what God's role is in our lives. What is outside of his purview? Do you have private things in your life that you keep God out of? That's an issue with you. It's not his understanding. Okay? So, man is to live the life of Christ in order to continue his mission here on earth. We need to continue his mission here on earth. So let's not pretend it's hard to understand what God wants of us. There is an old saying, whether it's true or not, that Einstein, Mr. Smarty Pants, Albert Einstein, was once asked, can you, with all your intellect, explain the parts of the Bible that are very hard to understand? And Einstein was reportedly said to have responded by saying, I am much more concerned with the parts I do understand. So when we know that that we have to live in a way in order to continue Christ's mission here on earth by doing unto others as we do unto him, is there anything vague about that? Is there anything complex about that? So let's not pretend that because there's so many things hard to understand, therefore we don't need to do them, right? Or that there aren't aspects of our life that somehow Christ is not involved with. Okay. Any questions on that? Yes?
Can you repeat the last one?
Yes. Man is to live the life of Christ in order to continue his mission on earth. So now here's our response. Now, I don't need you to continue this Bible verse. I want you to understand the context of it. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love. What do you call an if-then statement? What? A hypothetical, a conditional statement, right? Now, this doesn't say that if you don't do things, Christ won't love you. What it means is if you want to be in a relationship of love with him, keep his commandments. I'll ask you again, is there anything vague about that? Do you not know what his commandments are? Do you not know that now the fifth commandment, thou shalt not kill, is not just not killing people, but also hatred, right? So we have to understand that this is some sort of conditional thing, but it's conditional on our part, not God's, right? It's conditional on our part. This is a point that we cannot forget through the entirety of this course. The first and last point of reference in morality is the person, Jesus Christ. The first and last point of reference in morality is the person, Jesus Christ. Does anybody here go to St. John's? I don't know. Well, Father Rich one time was talking about the resurrection. Like, oh yes, we will eventually have a resurrection. He said Christ is the resurrection. We're always talking about a person when we talk about this, right? We're being brought into a love relationship. We're not going to, as the song says, to the place that is the best, right? This is about being close and in a relationship with a person. So the person, Jesus Christ, is going to have to imbue every last thing that we're doing in this morality course. What that means then is the virtues that are formed, right, And these virtues that are motivated must be saturated with love. We're going to need to know what that means, though. So the virtues are formed, motivated, and saturated with love. And the next example I'm going to give you here is hopefully going to help bring that out. It's saturated with love. Now, see, again, I don't think that should overwhelm anybody. You might be thinking, well, that's obvious. It's obvious to say it. It's not obvious to say, how does this play out in my life? That becomes much more challenging. So St. Basil, he posited 3 motivations for why we should turn away from evil. He said, if you turn away from evil because you are fearful of punishment, in other words, if you keep his commandments, right? If you keep his commandments because you are so terrified of the pains of hell, then your relationship with God is that of a slave. Okay? It's that of a slave. He said, if you keep his commandments because you want the reward, I just want to go to heaven. He says, you're nothing more than a hired mercenary. Now, before I go to the third one, I want to give you a personal relational context for this. Think of you and your parents, or think of you and your future children. That might even be better. In other words, if you ask your child to do something for you, would you be okay that he just does it because he's so scared that you're going to yell at him or punish him? What kind of relationship would you have with a child if you did that? Your future child, if you asked them to do something, would you like it if they only did it because that way they can get on your good side and borrow the car when they need it? You feel like you're being manipulated. Is that the kind of relationship you want? St. Basil says, when you do keep the commandments for love's sake, now you are a son and brother, daughter and sister. Wouldn't you like that from your own kids? They didn't want to do it. They're not interested in getting a reward. I'm going to do this for you because of the love I have for you. Do you get the different type of relationship that is? So when we go through morality, if you start hearing so-called rules, and if you think if you don't do it, you're going to be punished, or if you do it, you get to go to heaven, you have a very childish relationship with God and a childish understanding of what his love is for us, okay? So keep that in mind, all right? Any questions on that slide? Okay. Now, here's what we're going to do. This will be different for you. Has anybody ever heard of the title Enuma Elish? Okay. We all know our creation story in the Bible, right? The 7-day creation, he rested on the 7th day. What we don't know, what you may not know, is that there's other creation stories out there. Some a little similar to ours. Okay? So before I play it, I just want you to understand what the word mythos means. Okay? I'm using the word mythos to mean it tells us who we are as a people. Okay? Mythos, if you have to define it, is it tells who we are as a people. The reason why I don't use the word myth is because you would just hear a story, a made-up story. So we're using a different word so you understand that this is meant to tell us who we are as a people. I'm first going to show you a video on the Enuma Elish, and then I'm going to show you exactly the steps of it. Break it down into the sequence of the myth. And then I'm going to contrast it to ours. And then once you see the contrast, I think hopefully you'll understand what I'm trying to do. Do you have a question? This is ancient Babylonian, okay? So this myth predates our Hebrew and Christian books of Genesis, all right? This is probably about 8 to 11,000 BC. So ancient Babylonian, Mesopotamia, that section of the world. I know it looks almost like a little video game, but... So just listen, no notes.
Before anything had a name, before there was firm ground, or sky, or the sun and moon, there was Apsu, the sweet water sea, and Tiamat, the salt water sea. When these two seas mingled, they created the gods Amun and Lahamun, who rose from the silt at the edge of the water. When Lamu and Lahamu joined, they created the great gods Anshar, Kishar, and Anu. From this generation of gods, there arose mighty Ea and his many brothers. Ea and his brothers were restless. They searched over the waters day and night. Neither Apsu nor Tiamat could get any rest. They tried to plead with the gods to tread softly, but powerful Ea didn't hear them. Apsu decided the only way to have some peace was to destroy Ea and his brothers. He began to plot their demise with some of the first generation gods. But Ea heard of their plans and struck him down first. This began a war among the gods. Tiamat was furious that her mate was killed, and she began producing great and ferocious monsters to slay Ea and his brothers. She created poisonous dragons and demons and serpents. She created the viper, the sphinx, the lion, the mad dog, and scorpion man. The chief of them all was called Kingu. He led the army of Tiamat's monsters into heaven against Ea and his brothers to avenge Apsu's death. While Tiamat fashioned her army, Ea and the goddess Damkina created the great god Marduk. His eyes flashed with lightning, and when he spoke, he breathed fire. He was fearless and radiant. The gods cowered before him. "You are the great sun," they cried. Ea and the gods told him of the advancing army. They needed his help to defeat them. "I will fight for you, but after the war is over, I shall rule the universe on high." The gods agreed. Marduk made ready for battle. He gathered the four winds to clear the path to Tiamat. Marduk burst out of the sky in his flaming chariot, pulled by his team Killer, Crusher, Unyielder, and Fleet. He held the royal scepter and ring covered in golden armor. He rode into battle bearing his bow and arrows and a mighty thunderbolt. Marduk was glorious to behold. He struck fear in the hearts of all Tiamat's brood. The sea waters of Tiamat swirled together and formed a vast and fearsome dragon. She opened her mouth wide to scream. Before she could utter a word, Marduk cast a hurricane into her mouth. She swallowed it, and the hurricane almost burst her apart from the inside. Before she could cast a single spell, Marduk let one of his arrows fly. It cut her neatly in half. Tiamat's monsters trembled as she died. Marduk raised half of her body to the heavens to form the sky, and the other half formed the earth. Marduk was victorious, and now the undisputed king of the universe. No one ever questioned his rule. He created the days of the year, the planets and their paths in the heavens, the stars and their constellations, and the moon and her moods. He became the sun and gave all the gods their responsibilities. After a time, he decided to create a creature that could serve the gods and bear the burden of hard work looking after the earth. Marduk first created a structure from bone left over from the bones of the dead monsters from the war. Then he formed the flesh around it and breathed life into it. Man was given his name. He took up residence on the earth while the gods ascended to heaven. Thus the gods were freed from eternal labor.
Okay, so all you're going to need to know here is I want you to realize Enuma Elish means when on high. Okay? Enuma Elish means when on high. So almost all ancient documents derive their title from their opening few words. Catholic Church still does that. All right? I'm going to show you on the next slide the contrast between these two. I'm putting all these up here so I can give you a feel if you weren't able to follow the story. Okay? So there were a lot of gods there. There were water and everything. You have Apsu. Fresh water was benign. Salt water was evil. Okay? So Tiamat, you remember that there was some of these gods arose from the silt where the waters meet the shore. Apsu could not tolerate all the commotion. And even when Marduk was there, Marduk was creating the winds, and that drove him nuts, right? So Tiamat and Kingu set out to destroy, Apsu. Yes?
What is that word mean?
Went on high.
Went on high?
So Marduk, or Marduk, however you pronounce it, he agrees to destroy Tiamat and Kingu, but he kind of makes a deal. When I destroy them, I become the supreme god, right? So he rips Tiamat in half. Now you might catch some of this. It sounds similar to our creation story. He takes the two domes. One he fastens in the heavens, and on that dome he places the stars and all the planets and the moons. The other dome, he then creates the earth from that. He then takes the head of Kingu, because he killed Kingu, and he buries it in the sand, and he drives two spears through the eyes of Kingu, and from it flows the Tigris and Euphrates River. Okay? Marduk then commands the gods, and he himself, he forms the humans from what? The leftover parts of the battle. The blood and the bones and everything else. And then he builds the city of Babylon to be his residence on earth. All right. So, remember what I said about mythos. It helps us understand who we are as a people. If you were an ancient Babylonian, what would this mean for you? What's your relationship to God? You're created as an aftermath. All this chaos was going on. What is your role? To serve the gods. This is a really cool story if you're the king of Babylon. Why? Because then you'd be Marduk on earth. Otherwise, it's not really an appealing story. This is not who we want to be. Okay? So now I'm going to show you the Genesis mythos, the priestly mythos. This is the first one, right? Okay? Maybe I'll show it to you. Internet cooperates. What I want you to do is notice the differences.
Nothing existed except for God. God spoke and created the heavens and the earth. When he first created the earth, it had no shape, and total darkness covered the earth. The Spirit of God was present, hovering over the waters. God said, "Let there be light," and light was created. God separated the light from the dark. The light was called day, and the darkness was called night. God saw the light, and he knew that it was good. This all happened on the first day of creation. God began to separate the waters that were on the surface of the earth with the waters that were above the earth. God created a great expanse between the water on the earth and the water that was above the earth. He called this expanse sky.
Notice how it's orderly.
This all happened on the second day of
He
creation.
names it and then calls it good.
Then God created dry land on the earth. The waters were gathered together in one place, and then the dry land appeared. The dry land was called earth. And the waters, they were called seas. God then commanded the earth to grow plants and trees. And the plants and trees grew. And then God once again knew, this is good. This all happened on the third day of creation. Next, God placed lights in the sky. He created the sun to shine during the day, and the moon and the stars to shine at night. God gave us lights to provide light on the earth, to separate day from night, and to help us track time in days and years. This all happened on the fourth day of creation. God created all living things that are in the water, and all the birds that fly. God made them multiply and filled the earth and the sea. God again saw that this was good. This all happened on the fifth day of creation. And finally, God created the animals to cover the earth. The animals multiplied as well until they covered the entire earth. God looked down on his creation, and again he knew, this is good. Then God created people. God created people differently than anything else that he had created. God created people in his very own image. God took dust from the ground and he made a man. God took his very own breath and breathed into the man, and the man became alive. God then took a rib from the man and created a woman to become the man's helper and spouse. God named them Adam and Eve.
Okay. So let's look at the difference. First of all, this beginning of this book, we call it Genesis, literally means in the beginning. Okay? So we named our mythos after the first phrase, just like the Enuma Elish, which means when on high. The word Genesis from the Hebrew, Bereshit, means in the beginning. There should be stark contrast that we find between these. Last year what I did was I had the students do these on themselves and come up with the differences between them. All right, I just skipping that step out of here. In our story, there's only God. That's all there is. So he's eternal. He has no beginning or end. In the Enuma Elish, there are gods and there are water and there are gods creating gods. Okay? That's one very stark distinction between the two. Does anybody know what creation ex nihilo means? Out of nothing, yes. So in our mythos, everything that we see was created from nothing. It was actually created by a word spoken of God. God spoke the word, and they came into being. In the Enuma Elish, creation was from the bodies of Tiamat, Kingu, the blood and bones left over from the battles. Okay? Two different stories that are telling us who we are as a people. In the priestly mythos, everything is very orderly. It happens over the course of 6 days. And you know why they call it the priestly mythos? Because you can almost picture, this is not what they call it, but he's sitting as a priest on a chair making pronouncements. Let there be light. And there was light. It is good. Let there be land. Let there be water. I mean, he could make those pronouncements. A little bit of an aside. You understand in the Christian Hebrew Bible there are two creation stories side by side, right? The first creation is the priestly creation mythos. It goes into the first few verses of the second chapter of Genesis. And then chapter 2-4 begins a much more anthropomorphic, you don't need to know this for your notes, but a much more anthropomorphic creation mythos. You have God who's walking. You have God who gets down and forms people and breathes into it, right? Now, some Protestant churches will tell you, well, the second one really is no different than the first. It's just within the garden. They have different structures, different everything. They're different. They're like, literally like, I don't know, I think a couple thousand years apart in their authorship. So why is it that a Hebrew people would put two creation mythos side by side that have similar but differing sections? Because it's not about evolution. If you wonder why the Catholic Church has no problem with evolution, because this is not supposed to tell us how things were made. It's to tell us who we are as a people, all right? So that's not an issue with us. As Catholics, we're not creationists, all right? We're just not. We do not think everything was done in 6 days. Fossil fuel is not a relic. God did not make a museum with fossils. In other words, if you believe the Earth is only 8,000 years old, then the only way you can explain fossils and oil is that God created them as they are. All right? We don't ascribe to that. Anyway, back to here. In the Enuma Elish, creation's chaotic, right? There's all kinds of wars going on and fights, and that's what things are coming into fruition from. In the priestly mythos, man is created intentionally, right? It's the pinnacle of creation. After everything is done, after all the earth is set, after the animals are made, now we create man, and he speaks it. In the Enuma Elish, it's an afterthought. In other words, we got guys that got to do all this work. Well, I'll create a race of people and let them do the work so that you are freed, as it says, from eternal labor. All right? A quite different story of who we are as a people. In the priestly mythos, we are told that we are made in the image of our God. In the Enuma Elish mythos, man is a slave. What a different relation. So I want you to kind of like, the reason why I showed you the Enuma Elish is so that you'd have something to compare ours to. If I just told you, hey, here's our story, you would say, yeah, okay, I know it, I heard it, I read it before, I read it in Bible school or whatever. But now that you see there's other ones out there, there's more than this, by the way. Now that you see this, you get our story is different. It's not the same. Over here, the only one who really makes out is the king of Babylonia. Everybody else is just slaves, made as an afterthought and chaos, not created from anything. Over here, you're created from nothing. Intentionally, very orderly, man is made to image his God. This is a different story about who we are as a people. This is our story. I like our story better. So tomorrow, we'll talk about what does that mean then? If I'm made in his image, what does that mean? Do I look like him? Right? You guys ever hear of Father Guido Sarducci in Saturday Night Live? No? All right. I'll save you from the joke then.